My name is Emma, and I am 28 years old. That day, I wore the deep blue gown of graduation, walking onto the stage amid a wave of applause to receive my master's degree. It should have been the happiest day of my life, the day when years of effort were finally rewarded, the day I believed my life would turn to a new, brighter chapter. But only a few minutes after I left the stage, my world suddenly collapsed. I received devastating news. Aunt Violet, the woman who had raised me, protected me since I was 13, the only person I could truly call family, had died in an accident on her way to attend my graduation. My heart shattered into pieces. The joy had not even settled before it was cut short by unbearable grief. A few days later, I found myself sitting in a luxurious room where Aunt Violet's will was to be read. The golden light reflected against the paneled wooden walls, and the heavy silence pressed down on everyone present. I was still struggling to recover when the door swung open. Walking in were the very faces I thought I would never have to see again, my biological parents. They had disappeared from my life for 15 years, abandoning me when I was still a trembling child in an empty house. And yet here they were now, striding in with false composure, taking their seats, forcing a smile, and calmly declaring to the lawyer, "We are Emma's legal guardians. We are responsible for her." Responsible? Those words pierced through me like a knife. I looked straight at them, and a flood of emotions rushed through me, hatred, fear, and long-buried memories resurfacing. But in that moment, I realized I was no longer the abandoned child I once was. I drew in a deep breath and reminded myself, this time I will not step back, I will face them. Before I continue, I want to pause for a moment to ask you, the one listening to my story, where are you watching from today? Because I believe that somewhere out there, many others still carry wounds inflicted by their own families, just as I do. I remember my childhood as clearly as if it were yesterday, even though I tried countless times to bury it deep in my memory. My father was a gambling addict, able to sit for hours at the betting table without a thought for his family. Whatever little money we had never made it to the dinner table, it was thrown away in games of chance, in cards, in numbers, leaving us with nothing but empty pockets. He often came home drunk, his eyes bloodshot, his breath reeking of alcohol, and whenever he lost, his rage would pour down on me and my mother. My mother, on the other hand, was never truly stable. Some days she was gentle and lucid, holding me close, whispering that I was her greatest love. But only days later, she would turn into a stranger, muttering incoherently, yelling, or locking herself in her room for hours on end. I understood early on that my childhood would never be like the neighborhood children's, who were taken to the park by their parents or lovingly walked to school. When I was 13, everything ended. That day, I came home from school as usual. Our small, worn-down house at the end of the quiet street felt strangely still. The front door was left ajar, and the living room was silent. I called out, "Mom, Dad," over and over, but only hollow echoes answered me. On the table lay a single piece of paper, its scrawled message cold and final. "We can't raise you anymore. Take care of yourself." Just a handful of words, no explanation, no goodbye. My heart dropped into a void. I stood frozen, trembling as I held that note, tears streaming down my face. That night, I curled up in the corner of the room, listening to the howling wind outside the window, the creaking of the house pressing down on me like it wanted to swallow me whole. I can still remember the suffocating fear, the feeling that the entire world had abandoned me. The 3 days that followed were the longest of my life. There was no food left in the house, the refrigerator was empty, and I survived only by drinking water. I wandered around aimlessly, stomach gnawing with hunger, vision blurring from exhaustion. I was too afraid to step outside, too afraid that people would discover I had been abandoned, too afraid to face their pitying stares. At night, I lay on the sagging bed, listening to the growl of my stomach and soaking my pillow with tears. I kept asking myself, why me? What did I do wrong to be left like this? By the third day, the neighbors began to notice. Mrs. Marlene, the elderly woman who lived next door, knocked on the door and called for me, but I was too scared to answer. She heard me crying and grew concerned, gathering a few others. Eventually, they contacted the authorities. I was taken out of that house and placed on a worn wooden bench in the social services office, clutching tightly to an old notebook, the only thing I managed to bring with me. I remember the unfamiliar eyes of the social workers, filled with both pity and helplessness. In that moment, I felt like a forgotten object, something no one truly wanted to claim. The pain of that abandonment did not end with those 3 days of hunger. It left a scar etched deep within me, one that never fully healed. Every time I heard a child calling, "Mom," in the street, my chest tightened. Every time I saw a father holding his child's hand at the grocery store, I lowered my head and hurried away, fighting back tears. I grew up with the constant feeling that I was unwanted, an extra child, one that even my own parents did not care enough to keep. There were nights when I dreamed of chasing after my parents' shadows on a long, endless road. I called out until my voice was hoarse, but they never turned back, only walked farther and farther away until they vanished. I would wake up drenched in sweat, my throat tight with grief. I knew then that memory would never fade. It became a part of me, a part that made me both weaker and stronger. Weaker, because I always longed for love but could never truly trust it. Stronger, because from that moment on, I knew survival depended on no one but myself. That was the first climax of my life, a 13-year-old child abandoned in a cold house, with no food, no embrace, no promise of return. That wound followed me through every step of my journey, shaping the way I viewed life, the way I faced pain, and the way I searched for meaning. I was no longer the trembling child curled up in the corner, but I could never forget that feeling, the feeling of being cut off by my own parents, as if I had never existed at all. I met Aunt Violet for the first time on a gloomy afternoon at the social services office. I was nothing more than a frail child then, with dark circles under my eyes from countless sleepless nights, messy hair, and wrinkled clothes. I sat silently in the corner of the chair, clutching my old notebook tightly, too afraid to look at anyone. Then the door opened, and a woman walked in. She carried herself with elegance, her hair neatly curled, a refined leather bag in her hand. Her eyes, sharp yet shadowed with a sadness I could not yet understand, landed on me. I heard the social worker introduce her. "This is Violet, your aunt. She has agreed to take custody of you." At that moment, all I felt was strangeness and fear. I had believed no one would ever want me, and yet, there was someone. The first days living with Aunt Violet were truly difficult. She was an independent woman, experienced and deeply scarred by her own past. I heard from neighbors that she had once had a successful husband, but he betrayed her and left for another woman. Since then, she lived alone in her large lakeside house, pouring her energy into building her own business. She had no children and seemed to have no intention of remarrying. Perhaps that was why, when I entered her life, she still kept her distance and her strictness. I still remember those first mornings so clearly. Aunt Violet would wake me up on time and make me tidy my bed, folding the blanket neatly. If I did it carelessly, she wouldn't yell, but the stern look in her eyes sent a chill down my spine. Meals were always served on time, and I had to sit with my back straight, never slouching the way I used to. I felt afraid, distant, sometimes even as though I were being tested. I often cried quietly in my room, wondering if she truly cared for me or if she had only taken me in out of obligation. But as time passed, I began to realize something. Her strictness was not meant to push me away, but to teach me discipline. She didn't embrace me the way mothers often do, but she cared for me in her own way. When I had stomach pains, she didn't speak sweet words. She simply placed medicine and a glass of warm water on the table. When I woke terrified from nightmares, she didn't soothe me with promises. Instead, she turned on the light and sat nearby reading until I fell asleep again. Each small action lit a sense of safety in me, a safety I had long craved throughout my childhood. One day, I accidentally broke an antique vase in the living room, something I assumed must have been extremely valuable. I trembled, bracing myself for scolding. But Aunt Violet only looked at the shattered pieces, then turned to me. She spoke slowly. Objects can be lost, money can be lost, but dignity is something no one can take from you unless you give it up yourself. Never trade away your self-respect, Emma. Her words etched themselves deep into my heart like a vow. That was the first time I realized she was not only my guardian but also my teacher, guiding me out of the darkness of my childhood. From her, I learned to walk with my back straight, to meet people's eyes instead of lowering my gaze, to face pain with composure. She taught me that life can strip away many things: money, affection, even trust. But as long as I held on to my dignity, I could still stand tall. Aunt Violet became the role model I admired most. She was not only successful in business, running a chain of small but steadily growing companies, but she also lived a free life, dependent on no one. She had been betrayed, she had endured loss, but she never collapsed. Instead, she rebuilt her life from the ashes, and it was that resilience that she passed on to me. I saw in her the woman I wanted to become: independent, proud, unwilling to let anyone else define her worth. Living with Aunt Violet, I gradually learned to walk more firmly through life. She didn't just teach me about dignity, she encouraged me to pursue knowledge. She said, "Knowledge is something no one can ever take away from you. Once you have it, you'll have the power to decide your own fate." And so I threw myself into studying with all the strength I had. In high school, I was always among the top students. I applied for scholarships to ease her burden, and that sense of independence filled me with pride. I joined social activities, supporting underprivileged children, as a way to give back some of the love I had once been deprived of. Even so, my path to growing up was far from smooth. At school, there were still whispers, still prying eyes. Some classmates knew about my past, and they would whisper, "That girl was abandoned by her parents." Then they would snicker, looking at me as if I were some strange creature. At first, I lowered my head quietly, the way I used to when I was younger, avoiding every gaze, swallowing back tears. But each time I felt weak, I remembered Aunt Violet's stern eyes and the words she had once taught me. I didn't want to remain a victim forever. One day, in 10th grade, everything reached a breaking point. During literature class, the teacher assigned each of us to present a short essay on family in my eyes. When my turn came, the room fell silent. I walked to the podium, my hands trembling as I held my paper, but my voice gradually grew steady. Family is not only blood. Family is where someone chooses to stay with you, even when the whole world has abandoned you. I saw a few surprised looks, heard some snickers. Then a boy in the back who often mocked me spoke up. "That sounds nice, but your parents still left you. You're nothing but someone who got thrown away." The class burst into laughter. My chest tightened, but this time I didn't run. I took a deep breath, looked him straight in the eyes, and said, "Yes, my parents did abandon me. But at least I don't need to tear others down to feel like I matter. If your happiness depends on laughing at someone else's pain, then you are the most pitiful person in this room." The laughter died down. The teacher stared at me in surprise, while the boy flushed red. I didn't stop there. I turned to the whole class and said, "We all carry our own wounds. Mocking someone for theirs doesn't make us stronger, it only reveals our own weakness." The room went silent. That boy fumbled awkwardly until the teacher made him apologize in front of everyone. For the first time in my life, I watched the one who had bullied me bow his head and mutter, "I'm sorry." In that moment, I felt a new kind of strength awakening within me, the power of not staying silent, the power of standing up for myself. After that day, I was no longer afraid of people's stares. I kept joining clubs, becoming a representative speaker at many events. I realized I wasn't just a good student, I could also lead, inspire, and protect others. I started helping weaker students, stepping in when I saw anyone being bullied. People began to look at me differently, not as the abandoned girl anymore, but as Emma, confident and resilient. During those years, I began to truly understand Aunt Violet's teaching. Dignity is more important than anything else. I could not change the past, I could not force my parents to come back and love me. But I could choose how to live so that no one would define me by my old wounds. I could become myself, not just someone who survived, but someone who grew stronger from the ashes. When I entered college, I earned a full scholarship. I worked part-time, took part in community activities, and still maintained excellent grades. Each time I stood before a crowd to speak, I remembered the 13-year-old girl who once curled up in an empty house. And I smiled, because I knew I had come a long way from a fragile victim to someone who could resist, speak out, and protect herself. That was the turning point of my life. I no longer defined myself by the pain of being abandoned. I chose to define myself by the strength I gained from that pain. From then on, I knew I was ready to face any challenge that lay ahead. The day Aunt Violet passed away, I felt as though a part of my heart had gone with her. I had thought I was strong, but the moment I saw her coffin lowered into the ground, I realized just how immense that loss was. She had not only been my guardian, she was my anchor, my role model, the one who transformed me from an abandoned child into a woman who could stand tall. The lakeside house that had once felt warm because of her presence now seemed unbearably empty. I wandered through each room, running my fingers across the old books, the teacups she used, and my chest tightened with grief. A few weeks later, the official reading of the will took place. In a brightly lit room, Aunt Violet's lawyer, Mr. Anderson, held a thick file in his hands. He began to read, each word echoing in the heavy silence. I, Violet Harper, hereby leave all of my assets to Emma Harper. I froze, my heart pounding. Those assets included the lakeside villa where I had grown up, a chain of small but steady companies that she had built over many years, and an investment account worth $5 million. I sat motionless, overwhelmed, caught between shock and deep emotion. In that moment, I didn't feel joy or triumph the way outsiders might imagine. What I felt most clearly was the absolute trust Aunt Violet had placed in me. She was no longer here to guide me by the hand, but she had left behind an entire legacy, as if to say, Emma, I believe you can walk on your own. That trust was both a gift and a tremendous responsibility. I knew that without her, there would be no Emma as I am today. And now, it was my turn to carry that legacy, not to flaunt it, but to live true to everything she had taught me. I remembered the long nights when the two of us sat on the porch, gazing at the still surface of the lake. She often said, money can make life more comfortable, but it will never define you. What defines you is how you choose to use it. Now, her words echoed in my mind like a vow. I promised myself I would never let this inheritance become a burden or something that made me lose myself. I would use it wisely, to live with integrity, to help those in need, and to continue the path she had started. That will reading was already heavy with emotion, but their appearance made the air in that luxurious room so thick it felt as though it could be cut with a knife. Just as Mr. Anderson finished reading the crucial passage, the doors swung open, and my biological parents walked in. After 15 years of absence, they returned with a polished air, as if the cruel past had never existed. The man who once left me starving for 3 days now wore an old but neatly pressed suit, his tie carefully knotted. The woman who once scribbled those cold words, "Take care of yourself," now appeared in a dark dress, trying to maintain a dignified facade. They sat in the front row, smiling with false warmth, and then spoke. We are Emma's biological parents. We are her rightful guardians. Their tone was firm, as though it were an undeniable truth. I sat silently, my fingers tightening around the notebook on my lap, my heart racing. In my mind, the image of that abandonment note at 13 flickered, along with the nights I cried alone. But this time, I refused to let the pain consume me. I glanced at Mr. Anderson, who gave me a subtle nod, urging me to stay calm. After declaring themselves my guardians, my father began to speak. He tried to sound composed. Emma is still young. Even though she's educated, in business it's easy to be deceived by bad people. We only want to help manage this estate to protect her. My mother continued, her voice dripping with unbelievable sweetness. Darling, we made mistakes in the past, but now we can start again. This inheritance is too heavy for you to carry alone. We are family, we must hold it together. Every word pierced me like a needle. Family? If we were truly a family, I wouldn't have been left to starve for 3 days at 13. If we were truly a family, I wouldn't have stood in that cold, empty house holding a heartless note. I drew a deep breath, looked directly into their eyes, emotions surging inside me while my voice came out calm, almost steady. I asked, "Where were you when I was 13? The room seemed to freeze. They looked momentarily unsettled, their eyes darting away, but quickly they recovered their false confidence. My father cleared his throat and said, "Back then, times were hard. You don't understand. We suffered too." I let out a dry laugh. Suffered so much that you left a child alone in an empty house for 3 days without food? Suffered so much that the neighbors had to call the authorities to save me? If that was love, then I would rather have none. Mr. Anderson, the lawyer, sat silently, but I knew he was noting every word. I also noticed the staff from Aunt Violet's company, those who had known her well, casting doubtful glances at my parents. No matter how hard they tried to paint over the past, the truth could not be hidden forever. My mother changed her tone, almost as if she were performing. "Emma, I know you're angry, but we are still bound by blood. No one can replace your parents. You may resent us, but don't throw away the chance to heal this bond." I replied firmly. Blood doesn't equal family. The one who raised me, taught me, protected me, was Aunt Violet, not you. My father's brow furrowed, his voice sharper now. "Talking like that is unfilial. You have wealth now, you must think of family." I lifted my head high. Family is not an excuse for exploitation. This inheritance was left to me by Aunt Violet because she trusted me. It's not a reward for those who abandoned me. I will protect it, just as I will protect the dignity she taught me. They fell silent for a few seconds before turning to the lawyer, trying to apply pressure. "We have rights, we are her parents." But Mr. Anderson answered calmly. "The will has been legally validated. Emma's inheritance rights are absolute. If you wish to contest, we will settle it in court." His words cut through the room like a blade, and I saw their faces pale. Sitting there, I no longer felt like the child trembling in an abandoned house. I felt like a grown woman, confronting her past without fear. I had waited 15 years for this moment, the moment I could look them in the eyes and not flinch. I knew the fight was far from over, that they would not give up their ambitions easily. But I also knew that this time, I had the strength to face them, to fight back, and to protect what was mine. After the tense-will reading, I thought my parents would back down, but they didn't surrender so easily. A few days later, my mother called. Her voice was dripping with false sweetness. "Emma, we know we upset you that day. But we should sit down, talk as a family. At least give us one dinner to explain." I paused for a few seconds, then agreed. Not because I trusted them, but because I wanted to hear the truth from their own mouths. I also wanted to see what tricks they planned to play. Before leaving, I quietly activated the recording app on my phone and slipped it into my coat pocket. Aunt Violet had always taught me, don't just listen to words, keep evidence. We met at an Italian restaurant downtown. The golden lights glowed warmly, the soft sound of piano filled the air, but inside me was only coldness. They had arrived early, sitting at a two-person table, and when they saw me, they waved eagerly like doting parents. I sat down, keeping my face calm. The waiter brought wine, and the so-called reunion began. My mother spoke first, her eyes glistening with tears. "Emma, I'm sorry, we were foolish back then. I've never stopped thinking about you." I stared straight at her. "If you really thought about me, why not a single letter, not one phone call in 15 years? She froze, then quickly shifted into justification. "We were struggling. Your father was lost in gambling. I was sick. There was no other way." I pressed my lips together and said nothing. My father cut in, tapping his wine glass as if to clear the tension. "But things are different now. You're grown, you have wealth, a career. We only want to support you. Don't carry the burden alone." I narrowed my eyes. "Support me how?" He glanced quickly at my mother before answering. "We could co-manage the estate, put our names on the company, on the deed to the house. That way it will be safer for you. You're still young, Easy to be misled. I let out a cold laugh, one that even sounded strange to my own ears. Safe for me or for your debts? The air froze instantly. They exchanged uneasy glances before my mother rushed to fill the silence. Emma, we really are struggling. The bank is pressing us. Creditors are coming after us. If you could just lend us a portion, just a little, everything would be fine. My father added, yes, think of it as helping family. After all, we are blood. I nodded slowly, pretending to consider, while my hand brushed against the phone under the table, confirming the recording was still running. Then I began asking careful questions. If you truly loved me, then why did you leave me back then? Was debt more important than a child? My mother sighed, her eyes darting away. You don't understand. We had to make a difficult choice. I pressed, my voice sharp. What choice? To abandon me and disappear. Or was there something else I don't know? My father took a sip of wine, and in a moment of carelessness, he let it slip. We accepted money to give up custody. The authorities made an offer, and we thought it was the only way to escape the burden. As soon as the words left his mouth, my mother shot him a furious glare, but it was too late. I had heard every word. My heart felt slashed open, yet at the same time, a cold satisfaction spread through me. Finally, the truth was out from their own lips. I straightened in my chair, my eyes like ice. Thank you for being honest. For years I asked myself why I was abandoned. Now I know. You sold me for a handful of dirty money. My mother panicked. It's not like that. We only wanted you to have a better life. I cut her off. Don't excuse it. I've lived well, but not because of you. Because of Aunt Violet. A woman you two never deserved to stand beside. The air at the table was strung tight like a wire. A waiter approached to refill water, then sensed the tension and quickly retreated in silence. I stood, looking straight at them. I came here for the truth, and now I have it. From this day forward, stop pretending. Don't use the word family to trap me. My family died the day you signed away your right to be parents. I walked out, leaving behind two pale, stunned faces. In my coat pocket, the phone was still running, recording every confession. That would be the evidence for what I knew was coming. This time, I was no longer the victim. I was the one in control, the one who would drag the truth into the light. And I knew the real battle had only just begun. I thought after that tense dinner my parents might back down. But I was wrong. A few weeks later, I received a notice from the court. They had hired a lawyer and officially filed a petition to claim a share of the inheritance. In the documents, they claimed to be my legal guardians, arguing that I was still young and inexperienced, and that such a large estate required joint management by my biological parents. Attached were fabricated papers presented as evidence, statements claiming they had supported me, even forged emails suggesting I had requested them to be co-owners of the company and the property. I sat in my office, my hands trembling as I read each page, but then I steadied myself. I knew this was the moment to use everything Aunt Violet had taught me, to keep my dignity, but also to protect myself with reason and proof. The very next morning, I went straight to Mr. Anderson. He glanced at the stack of forged papers my parents had submitted and shook his head slightly. Clumsy tactics, he said, but without counter-evidence, they can still stir up trouble. Don't worry, we'll fight back. We began gathering documents. I contacted social services, the very agency that had rescued me from that abandoned house when I was 13. They still kept the full record, the neighbor's report, the official statement confirming that my parents had relinquished custody. Most important of all, there was a document clearly stating that they had signed to accept a financial payment in exchange for permanently terminating their parental rights. Those cold words were the very proof of the truth they had tried to bury. We didn't stop there. We traced the old banking transactions, confirming the exact sum they had received. I also submitted the recording from that dinner, capturing my father's own slip. We accepted money to give up custody. On top of that, Anderson had a tech expert analyze the forged emails they provided. The result was undeniable. All of them had been created from an address opened just a few months ago, with the IP address tracing directly back to their current apartment. On the day of the trial, I sat in the courtroom, my heart pounding but my eyes calm. My parents entered with their heads high, as if they were the true victims. Their lawyer droned on, insisting that they only wanted to protect me from business manipulation, that as biological parents, they had a natural right. I sat quietly, letting them perform their play. Then it was Mr. Anderson's turn. His voice was steady, precise. One by one, he laid out the evidence. First came the social services file, detailing how my parents had abandoned me at 13. The courtroom fell utterly silent as the report was read aloud. The child was left alone for 3 days without food, the neighbors contacted authorities, the parents signed to relinquish custody. I watched their faces turn pale. Next, Anderson presented the bank records, proving they had received money in exchange for signing away their parental rights. Then he played the recording from the dinner. My father's voice echoed through the speakers, clear as day. We accepted money to give up custody. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. I sat still, eyes fixed on them, saying nothing. Their lawyer stammered objections, claiming it was only drunken talk, unreliable. But immediately, Anderson revealed the forensic report on the forged emails. The technical evidence showed they had been sent from their very own apartment, time-stamped to the exact dates. There was no escape. Finally, the prosecutor stood. His voice rang sharp and firm. Based on irrefutable evidence, the court recognizes not only the false inheritance claim, but also the use of forged documents and emails to seize assets. This constitutes property fraud. Those words echoed through the courtroom. I felt my whole body tremble, not with fear, but with the overwhelming weight of truth finally brought into the light. I looked at my parents. They sat frozen, faces pale, lips trembling without a sound. The man who once screamed in my face that I was a burden, the woman who once abandoned me with a cold note saying, "Take care of yourself," now they shook in the courtroom, unable to hold on to their arrogance. I didn't feel joy or triumph, only a deep, quiet sorrow. But at the same time, I felt a release. For the first time in 15 years, the truth had been spoken openly, and I was no longer a silenced victim. The trial ended with victory clearly on my side. The estate remained mine, exactly as Aunt Violet's will had stated. My parents now faced charges of document forgery and property fraud. As I left the courtroom, many people came to shake my hand, congratulating me, telling me they admired my courage. But inside me, the only words echoing were Aunt Violet's. Money can be lost, but dignity can never be taken. That day, I had kept my dignity intact, and I had kept my promise to her. I thought that after such a humiliating defeat in court, they would vanish from my life, at least for a long while. But people like my parents never let go so easily. Just days after the verdict, while the news of the case was still running in local papers, they appeared at the doorstep of my home, the lakeside villa Aunt Violet had left me. At first, I only saw their figures from a distance, but soon came the pounding, relentless and violent, as if they meant to break the heavy wooden door down. I stood in the living room, watching their faces on the camera screen mounted by the door. Their expressions were twisted with fury. My mother screamed, her shrill voice cutting through the air. "Emma, open this door right now. We need to talk. You owe your parents an explanation." My father slammed his fists against the door, shouting, "Don't think winning in court means it's over. You're still my daughter, you can't escape us." His voice was thick with alcohol, his bloodshot eyes like a cornered beast. But this time, I didn't tremble, didn't curl up in fear like that 13-year-old child I once was. I was ready. After the trial, I had anticipated they might try to pressure me again. I had hired a team to install surveillance cameras around the property, from the gate to every corner of the yard. I had also spoken with the local police, explaining the risk of harassment, and they had agreed to keep discreet watch nearby, ready if needed. Everything was part of my plan, not for revenge, but to protect my own peace. The pounding grew louder, curses echoing through the garden. I switched on the external speaker, my voice calm as it carried out. If you do not leave immediately, I will call the police. Everything you do is being recorded." My words only made my mother shriek louder. "How dare you treat your own parents this way? Ungrateful child, you owe us, we gave you life, and you took everything." I gave a cold smile and answered simply, "The one who gave me life was Aunt Violet, the woman who raised me and taught me. The two of you sold me off 15 years ago. Since then, we have had no ties." They didn't listen. They began pounding harder, and my father even threw his weight against the door. But everything was already part of my plan. Within minutes, 2 police officers arrived, red and blue lights flashing outside the gate. They ordered my parents to stop immediately, but the 2 of them kept screaming, insisting that because I was their biological child, they had rights. Those words, of course, only made the officers more firm. Every detail was captured clearly by the security cameras, from the pounding fists on the door to the threats they shouted. I stood behind the curtain, watching it all with a strange sense of detachment. There was no fear, no sorrow. Instead, I felt a calmness mixed with a quiet satisfaction. For years, they had forced me to live in shadows, to cry alone, to carry the shame of abandonment. But today, they themselves were exposing their true faces before the law, and before the daughter they had once thrown away. The police quickly took control of the situation. They documented the incident, ordered my parents to leave the property immediately, and filed a report for harassment and trespassing. I handed over all the footage from the cameras, along with the audio files from the security system. One officer turned to me and said firmly, "Rest assured, everything that happened today will be kept as evidence. If they return, a restraining order will be issued at once." I nodded, a weight lifting from my chest. As they were escorted out of the garden, I saw my father glance back, his eyes filled with both rage and helplessness. My mother, meanwhile, continued to scream, calling me a traitor, an ungrateful child. But her words carried no weight anymore. I had heard enough of them in the past, and now they were nothing more than empty echoes. When the gate closed, restoring the quiet of the lakeside villa, I sat on the sofa and closed my eyes. I didn't feel the thrill of revenge, but a deeper joy. For the first time in my life, I was in full control against those who had once hurt me. I was no longer the child curled up in a dark house, but a grown woman who knew how to protect herself and set boundaries. That day became a milestone in my journey. It marked just how far I had come from an abandoned victim to someone who could take command of the situation. More importantly, it reminded me that peace never comes on its own. It must be built, it must be defended, sometimes with decisions that are firm and cold. After that incident, I knew there was one final step to end the chaos. The years had taught me that some doors, once opened, bring nothing but pain. And sometimes, the wisest choice is to lock them tight and throw away the key forever. I sat down at the desk in Aunt Violet's study, the familiar scent of oak wood still lingering. I pulled out a blank sheet of paper. My hand trembled slightly, but my heart was steady. I wrote, "All contact ends here. I owe my parents nothing. Live your lives as I will live mine." Just a few short lines, but they closed an entire chapter of my life. I sealed the letter inside an envelope and sent it by registered mail. I wanted to be certain they would receive it. As I pressed the stamp down, I suddenly thought of the note they had left me when I was 13. "Take care of yourself." 2 pieces of paper, 2 different times, but with opposite meanings. Back then, I was abandoned. Today, I was the one choosing to cut ties. The only difference was that I wrote not out of cruelty or indifference, but out of self-protection. I no longer needed their love, and I certainly did not need their presence in my life. A few weeks later, I heard from an old acquaintance in the neighborhood. My parents were now living crammed into a shabby apartment on the outskirts of town. Their mounting debts, combined with legal disgrace, had left them with almost no standing in the community. Meanwhile, the lakeside villa remained peaceful, filled with sunlight and the fragrance of the lavender Aunt Violet had planted years ago. I could sit on the porch, watching the lake reflect the sky, listening to the morning birdsong. The contrast between the 2 scenes was striking. On one side, collapse, on the other, serenity. And for the first time, I felt no need to compare or to gloat. I simply felt at ease. I once believed that justice could only be achieved if those who hurt me suffered twice as much. But after everything, I realized the greatest justice is the ability to let go. I didn't need to push them into a corner. Their own choices had led them here. I didn't need to take revenge. Life had already done that for me. What I needed was to build a clear boundary. They on their side, I on mine, with no shared path between us. One afternoon, I opened the windows to let the breeze flow through the room. A steaming cup of coffee sat on the table. I looked around the house, filled with memories of Aunt Violet, and whispered, "I did it, Aunt." I didn't feel triumph at my parents' downfall, but I no longer carried their burden either. I felt free, truly free for the first time since childhood. If someone were to ask me whether I had regrets, I would say yes, but not for cutting ties. My only regret was wasting so many years chasing a family bond that never existed. Now I understood that peace does not come from clinging to those who don't deserve you, but from daring to let go. Instead of letting hatred consume me, I chose to move forward, to love myself, to protect the rest of my life from old wounds. That night before bed, I pulled out the old notebook, the one I had clutched the day I was abandoned. The pages had yellowed, but my childish handwriting remained. "I wish someone would truly love me." I touched the words gently, then closed the book with a smile. I whispered, "Now I do. That someone is me." And sleep came easily, without the old nightmares of chasing shadows down an endless road. After officially cutting ties with my parents, I felt both empty and relieved. It was a strange silence, part loss, part liberation. I knew I could not let that emptiness consume me. I had to turn the pain into something better, a living legacy true to what Aunt Violet had always wanted. So I began to build a plan I had once only dared to dream. The creation of a scholarship fund for children abandoned, just as I had been all those years ago. I named the fund Wings of Violet, Purple Wings, in honor of the woman who gave me the chance to rise out of the abyss. I used part of Aunt Violet's investment savings to start it, then reached out to friends in the business world I had come to know, asking for their contributions. The scholarship fund would not only cover tuition but also provide books, life skills training, and, most importantly, psychological counseling. Because I knew all too well that emotional wounds are harder to heal than empty plates. On the day of the first scholarship ceremony, I stood on stage, looking at those young faces glowing with hope, and my throat tightened. I saw myself in them, the 13-year-old girl clutching her notebook, crying alone in an empty house. But this time, I was no longer helpless. I had become the hand that pulled them into the light. Alongside the scholarship, I also expanded my own education. I enrolled in an international business program in Europe, both to sharpen my knowledge and to give myself the chance to breathe in new horizons. I traveled not to escape, but to discover. From the glittering streets of Paris to the calm of Kyoto, from the bustling avenues of New York to the lavender fields of Provence, each place I stepped into gave me a new piece of life. I wrote down my experiences as if keeping a diary of growth. In every journey, I realized something simple yet profound. The world is far larger than the darkness my childhood once locked me inside. Aunt Violet's business also grew under my care. I restructured the company, adding projects in green technology and sustainable real estate. Many were surprised to see someone as young as I was able to hold her ground in such a competitive field, but I knew success didn't come from luck. It came from years of discipline and resilience. Every time I signed a new contract, I remembered her words. Money can be lost, but dignity can never be taken. And I reminded myself never to trade that value for profit. One autumn afternoon, just after I returned from work, I unexpectedly saw my mother on the street. She wore an old coat, her figure weary, her face more worn than the last time I had seen it. She stopped when she recognized me, and in her eyes flickered something impossible to pin down: surprise, envy, regret. That look made my heart ache faintly, but then I felt a calm I had never known. I no longer wanted to run to her, asking why, nor did I crave an apology. I simply stood there, offered a soft smile, and nodded in greeting. She said nothing, only stared at me for a long moment. And in that silence, I knew she realized the distance between us was no longer measured by blood, but by a lifetime of choices. I walked away, leaving her envious gaze behind me, and whispered to myself, "Money does not define me. Freedom defines me." I did not live to prove to them that I had succeeded. I lived for myself, for the children I was helping, for the life I had chosen, a life no longer bound by the past. In the years that followed, my scholarship fund grew stronger, helping hundreds of children step onto university campuses. Many of them later became teachers, doctors, engineers, and when they returned to thank me, I would simply smile and say, "Don't thank me, live kindly, and pass on the opportunity to someone else." That is the most beautiful way to repay. I watched the circle of kindness expand, and I knew Aunt Violet would be proud if she could see it. In every one of those moments, I felt healing spreading within me. Not because I had forgotten the old wounds, but because I had learned how to turn them into strength. From an abandoned little girl, I had become a free woman, one who knew how to love herself and give love where it truly belonged. Most importantly, I no longer searched for my worth in the eyes of those who had left me behind. I found it in every step I took on my own. I know there are so many people out there, just like me, who carry scars left by their own families. If you are listening to this story, I want to tell you that you are not alone. Maybe you were belittled, maybe you were abandoned, maybe you once thought your worth was nothing. But the truth is, you have the power to rewrite your story. You can discover your true value within, and you can build a new family out of love even if they are not bound to you by blood. Because sometimes, real family is not where you were born, but where someone chooses to stay and love you unconditionally. Remember, setting boundaries is not selfish. It is courage. Because if we don't know how to step away from the things that hurt us, we will never find peace. It took me many years to learn that, but I believe you can learn it faster, braver. And when you move beyond the fear, you will see. This world is vast, and your heart deserves healthy love and freedom. I lifted my coffee cup, letting its warmth spread through my fingers. The late sunlight spilled across the lake, glittering like fragments of broken glass forming a serene painting. I smiled, no longer thinking of the past with hatred, but with gratitude, gratitude that it shaped me, and gratitude that I became strong enough not to let it define me. Peace, freedom, healing. That was the gift I gave to myself, and it is also what I hope you will find on your own journey.